Thank you all for joining us today. This is the future of brand partnerships and influencer marketing. Everyone in the right place? Okay, perfect. So the voice of brands has evolved. It used to be that a brand was represented by a single voice, and now a brand is represented by many voices. And the savvy brands have jumped on the bandwagon. In fact, according to the latest eMarketer study, they did a global study on who people follow on social media. And it is people follow others that they don't know in real life in really huge numbers. And the younger the audience is, the younger the people are, the more that is true for. For example, people follow the 16 to 24 age range groups, this is globally, tend to follow singers, musicians, and bands at 45%. Mind you, they follow people they know in real life at right around just over 50%. So almost 1-to-1. And they follow sports stars at 30% of them follow sports stars. And they follow actors at around 50%. So around close to 50% of the younger folks around the globe follow actors. So obviously, brands have jumped on the bandwagon and realized that they have to evolve to include influencers into their brand strategy. So we have an incredible lineup here for you today. We'll be looking under the hood of a little bit on brand partnerships, but mostly focused on influencer marketing, how to find the right fit for your brand, what platforms to use, what to do and not do, so a little bit of best practices, and you'll hear real world examples of how influencers are used to help a brand's reach and how success is measured. So before we tell us a little about who we are, we'd like to know who you are. So raise your hand if you work for a brand. Okay. How about an agency? Do you work for an agency? Okay, great. You're an influencer or you want to become an influencer. Okay, thank you. And then you own a small business and you want to know how to get started on implementing an influencer program. Is that you? Okay. And then the last one, you're in a function that doesn't directly touch brand partnerships, but you want to brush up on this topic. Is that you? Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much. All right, so now let's hear who our panelists are today. Sybil, do you want to get us started?
Sure. So I'm Sybil Grebe. I'm the former U.S. head of influencer strategy and programming for Edelman, which is the largest privately owned PR and communications firm in the world. Prior to that, I was at William Morris Endeavor and headed up digital talent and brand partnerships there. I resigned from Edelman in August with the intention of taking time off, but accidentally joined the board of 2 companies and started my own consulting firm. So apparently bad at taking time off, but that's what I'm up to.
My name is Corey Weiss, and I'm with a company called Ipsy. And to get you guys engaged, who here has heard of Ipsy? A couple of you, so maybe you guys are the ones that might have the right answer. Being that this is influencers, who knows what beauty influencer was a co-founder of Ipsy? Well, I might have to make this simpler. That would be Michelle Phan. Does anyone know what the name of our monthly subscription service is called? Does anybody know what category Ipsy's in? Beauty. So you're going to get the Glam Bag Plus, which is for $25 a month, you get over $150 worth of beauty products. But yes, Ipsy is the world's largest, most passionate beauty community and beauty subscription service. I head up business development, which also is inclusive of what we call influencers creators, but creator partnerships. And you'll hear more about Ipsy during the panel.
I'm Simon Kelly. I'm the CEO, the Chief Enthusiasm Officer of Story Worldwide. As the name suggests, actually the name suggests we're worldwide. We're not. We're in New York and Seattle. I'll drop the worldwide bit, just in the interest of truth-telling. So Story, as the name suggests, is actually a brand storytelling agency, and that we break that down into three things. We help brands find their narrative. And a word on that, and I think Sybil might have heard this before, but I'm passionate about, I'm on a mission to differentiate narrative and story. Everybody uses them interchangeably. They're not the same, they're different. And I found a fantastic definition that I like to use. I'm trying to evangelize across the world, which is that narrative is a system of stories. The narrative doesn't change, the stories might change, but the narrative is the thing that doesn't, it's the DNA. And it's really important, I think, when we're talking about brand partnerships and influencer marketing, that we sort of differentiate those two. So we help brands find the narrative, and then we bring the narrative to life through story making. We create stories that bring that platform to life. It could be video, could be social media, could be more traditional forms of advertising, and so on. And obviously, influencer marketing is part of that. And then most recently, I merged Story with an influencer agency about 3 months ago. And so we've added what we call story sharing to our capabilities. So we do this sort of finding, making, sharing journey with our brands. That's what we do.
Hi, I'm Jen Garcia Allen. I'm head of editorial and programming at Whale Rock Industries in West Hollywood. We are a media company with television, digital, and creative services divisions. I have a career in publishing. So before I came to Whale Rock about 5 years ago, I ran the LA office for People Magazine for 10 years. So worked with some of the biggest influencers in the world, but from a different side and really before influencer marketing was a thing. But I joined Whale Rock to launch the Kardashian-Jenner apps. So I ran apps and websites for all of the Kardashian-Jenner sisters for about 3 years before taking over, overseeing the editorial and programming for all the brands at our company. That includes Wonderwall, it includes Adam Savage's Tested, Howard Stern, who we manage his social and his website, and then we also work with larger brands. So companies like Walmart, and most recently we're working with SiriusXM to launch their video platform, as well as content marketing for them.
Thank you, guys. And I'm Erin Kapczynski. I actually spent my career running marketing teams for media and technology companies whose clients were also household name brands such as Viacom, Yahoo, Samsung, Google. And now I work at a boutique marketing agency called Control Media, and we help similar brands tell their stories and grow their brands. And our clients include huge publicly traded companies such as Experian and media companies such as Ranker and Leaf Group, and also smaller startups such as Greenfly and System One. And I personally work very closely with the LA Chamber of Commerce, and I'm an official advisor for their tech incubator as well. So now that you know who we are, let's dive into some of the conversations. So first of all, how do brands work? How do brands work with influencers? What's a typical engagement like? Jen, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. I think the first thing to start with is it's changed a lot. Influencer marketing right now, I think the biggest change that I've seen is that it's become a mainstream marketing channel itself. So I think that previously it was a lever that we would pull, and I think right now it requires a strategy within itself. I think in terms of how brands partner with influencers, you have to first figure out the audience that you're trying to speak to. And for me, that's going up 30,000 feet, right? So that's the first thing that I consider. I really try and figure out who the audience is. So a little bit later, we might get into talking about some of the tools and data, but, can't underscore the importance of data because you have to figure out who your audience is first. And once you can figure out who your audience is first and who you're trying to speak to, then you can pair the right influencer with that. And do you guys want to jump in a little?
I was just going to say 100% agree. Audience first, absolutely. And, in agreement too, and how brands used to partner with influencers versus how they do now. I think in the beginning it was kind of like, oh, they're talent. We'll write a script. We want them to do exactly this and then exactly that. And it just doesn't work with influencers. They're not actors. It has to feel relevant to their channel. It has to feel, it has to be engaging. It has to feel organic, all of those things. And I think brands are finally, for the most part, starting to come around and give a little bit more
Creative
of the
freedom.
creative control to the talent. And as they start doing that, they see that it's actually performing better. And so it is helping, I think, to do it that way.
I agree with that too, but I think there's you have to be careful. It's sort of gone from one extreme to the other, where it's highly scripted to sort of highly freeform, and
Right.
you obviously want the voice. You don't want to diminish the authenticity of the voice of the influencer by making it scripted and not seeming like it's them. At the same time, ultimately you're spending money on your brand, and you want your brand voice to be part of that conversation as well. And so I think that the challenge that a lot of brands find when they're working with influencers and other channels for that matter is, how do you brief an influencer? How do you make sure that they understand what the brand stands for, the narrative, and then give them the freedom to be able to talk about that? And it's really like a creative brief. In the agency world, it's the strategy team that would work with the creative team to give them the brief about the brand. And I think some of the best practices I've seen with influencers are when you follow that process.
I'll add that I actually don't think it's the how or the who or the what. The first question is the why. And I think that's the biggest issue right now, where people don't really think about why they're working with influencers. It's become a bit of a trend to work with influencers, but people shouldn't work with influencers for the sake of working with influencers unless there's a real reason why, and why you want to work with them. And then you can start thinking about who your audience is, what you want them to do, because it's not a one size fits all. And that's one thing I would say is, if anyone's going to do a program with influencers, that you really have to, don't take anything off the shelf and really custom craft it for your needs.
And I think, just to add on that, I think that's incredibly important, right? And everything should ladder back to business goals. So first and foremost, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to sell things? Is it brand awareness? Is there a call to action? And then you have to look at the metrics, that you're gonna identify, those KPIs that will help you determine if that was successful or not. And it's really important that you know those going into a campaign, and instead of looking at things after. Because I think, something else I've seen is that you can pivot and really make changes to a campaign in real time. You might not be able to take it from one end to another, but as long as you're monitoring metrics and seeing how things are performing in real time, you can change the performance. So I think that's something that's really important.
Great point. Okay. So actually one more question for you guys. Raise of hands, how many of you have actually run influencer activations before? Okay, amazing. For those of you who have not, and for those of you who have, to potentially validate your own strategies, can you guys weigh in on how influencers get paid?
We were talking before, the biggest issue in the influencer space is there's no standardization. So there's no real standardization on how you classify influencers. Often you hear nano, micro, macro, mass, mega, super mega. There's all these levels, right? But no one uses the same numbers to fill in those buckets. And the same goes with pay. In terms of, it's not like display advertising where you use CPMs, or there might be some form of standardization. So influencers get paid in different ways. The one thing I will say is that you don't pay influencers with product. You do need to pay them fairly, because they still have bills to pay, and sending them a box of product or free this or that doesn't pay the rent. So there is no standardization.
One thing I would add to that, I often would see with brands, they felt like, oh, I just want this one small Instagram post. That's all I need. I don't need a YouTube video. So it should be much cheaper. But if you're looking at, especially coming from WME, when we're working with the talent on that side, if you are Coca-Cola and the influencer works with you, okay, sure, maybe they're only doing something small for you, but it takes them out of the market. It means they can't work with Pepsi. It means they can't work with anybody else. And so what you almost have to think about it, no matter what you're asking for, you're buying exclusivity in your vertical. Because if I'm doing my research, I mean, Samsung was a client of ours, and so we would find these creators that were like, oh, this person is amazing. And then we'd see a photo of them at the gym, and in the reflection, you see their iPhone, and you're like, scratch, and you have to like keep going through, and we'd have all of these different things. And you can definitely convert people and say like, okay, you use an iPhone, but we'd love for you to, X, Y, Z. But I think that was always something that was interesting for brands to realize is like, you are taking them out of this vertical. It's not just what you want, it's what they have to say no to now.
I think that's true, and I think the smarter brands are sort of, I think it's evolved. I think the payment model has evolved from, just based on the following and the reach, to more of a more traditional media model. So I slightly disagree with what you said, Corey, where there is a CPM basis, or there is a.
But the prices of CPMs vary. There's no one to say that
Right.
what that value is, but. I think people are attempting to make it more standardized.
I think so, and I think it's smart. Ultimately, you want there to be some kind of relationship between what you're paying and what you're getting in terms of engagement levels, in terms of activities, and ultimately in terms of sales. So I think the payment model is continuing to evolve. There isn't a standard model, but it's beginning to look a bit more like the media model.
Right. I mean, I think people are trying to bucket things, right? Even at like a high level. So for an Instagram post, and yes, it's going to vary wildly if you ask a Kardashian versus, someone on Vanderpump Rules. But, I think there are also different price structures for what platform, for doing something in person, for, event appearances, for live coverage. So it also depends on how you want to activate the influencer. Because I think that another thing is that just with the crowded marketplace, right? Influencer marketing has grown tremendously, and they're forecasting for it to only keep growing, the industry overall. So as it gets more crowded, I think brands are going to have to look at things in a more out-of-the-box way. And they're going to really have to look at their marketing strategies and see how they can differentiate themselves from other people.
I think also as a brand, you could be a little bit creative about things too, where, sometimes it doesn't have to be that you pay them everything in advance or, 50% advance, 50%, whatever the terms look like. You could also do something where you've got a kicker. If X happens, then you get Y in addition, or, there's some variation that you can have as well. So it's not just straight.
Yeah, incentivize them.
Yeah.
Right.
Does the influencer have to like the brand they're working with? Yes or no?
I think we'll all unanimously agree. I will say, I think my feeling is I don't engage with an influencer unless I've searched and see that they're talking about my brand. Otherwise, it's useless money. I mean, consumers are so smart these days. People on social media are so smart that you need to have some, connection with the brand. So I think the answer, I would imagine we all would agree.
Absolutely. And credibility is everything. I mean, you don't want to damage your credibility as a brand. And I think when working with influencers, it's all about transparency. I mean, over the past couple of years, we've now seen, disclosures. I mean, you have to disclose being that this is an ad or paid partnership, because people got really smart. And I think that consumers they just didn't want to see the shady stuff.
Yeah. There's actually a brand, I was just talking to a friend of mine who heads up sales for one of the top esports teams in the world. And yesterday he was just telling me about this integration that the talent did with a undisclosed beverage company. And the beverage company was really smart, because what they did was they said, we want you to start drinking our beverage in your streams for like 3 months. before we launch your flavor, your partnership with us. And so it became something that his audience was already accustomed to seeing. And then it didn't feel out of context when suddenly he's like, hey, I love this and I'm launching my own flavor and you guys should buy this. Then, and it's also, it is very in tandem with like, his flavor. Like I think all of those pieces worked really well together, but made me think of that.
Yeah, it's true. Audiences are like crime scene investigators. They know exactly what you're drinking. They know what color pen you're writing with. And if all of a sudden you're using a black ink pen and you normally write in blue, they know. So don't try to pull the wool over their eyes because
Coffee cup Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work.
But yeah, I think it's also true for the influencers as well. It's not just about the brand losing its authenticity.
Sure.
It matters for the influencer as well. If it's obvious that they're really not into the product, they don't like it, you can't fake it. And so they lose their following, and they're not going to be, they lose their authenticity.
And you want them to turn it down if it's not a product they
Yeah, for
love.
sure.
Like, it used to break my heart at WME when I would be like, here's a 6-figure deal, and a 16-year-old would be like, oh, but I don't like that brand, I like this other brand better. And you're like, you could buy a Tesla, but you're too young to drive, and you're telling me no. But at the same time, it's like, that's absolutely what you want, so that because then you can go to the other brand and say, hey, they love you, and like they would love to work with you, and then it becomes much more authentic from there.
So for those in the back, authenticity, that's the takeaway from this particular segment. So how do you find the right influencers? Like, what criteria do you use?
So for me, it was always who is the right person who's already having the right conversation with your target audience. And I think that's exactly what you said. Like, you're not going to approach somebody who's never had any integration with Ipsy. That's got to be number one. Definitely knowing who your audience is and starting with that, and then really figuring out, okay, who's speaking to that audience, who's influencing that audience, and figuring out from there who already has the right message, so it'll feel on brand for the brand and the talent.
Yeah, so it's art and science. There's platforms you can use, and they'll give you suggested or recommended influencers for your brand, and then the art is going down the rabbit hole. Who here has gone down the rabbit hole where you start looking at one influencer and then you look at other influencers? Next thing you know, it's like an hour later, and you're way in it. So I think you combine the both, where there's a little bit of gut instinct of who's the right feel for your brand, and there's also using the science of platforms.
Well, and also looking at, I agree with that completely. Where, sometimes you'll get an influencer recommendation, but actually if you start doing some sleuthing, you sort of become an investigative journalist as opposed to a crime scene reporter. You start looking at who are the influencers that the influencer is influencing, because they may be off the radar. They may not be sort of instantly rising to the top as far as the channels you're using to find them. So it's kind of a bit of legwork as well as using the science.
Because there are, and just to give you guys a few specifics, I mean, there are a bunch of companies. There's a company called Tagger Media. There's a company called Dash Media. There's a social tool called Social Bakers that, it can schedule social posts for you, but then it also has a sort of influencer engagement ranking. So you can get plenty of help, but it's also really important to do your own homework, for sure.
Yeah.
So you've found the right influencer, maps to your brand, have the audience that you want to reach. So influencers are all about your audience extension. What platforms? What's the right platform mix, and how do you determine that? But platforms, I mean, like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, etc.
I think you look at who you're trying to reach, and that determines the platform. I think then you could also work backwards. So if there's an influencer that is the perfect fit for your brand, you also have to see the platforms that they are most relevant on. And that's kind of where I'd start.
And it depends on your product. I mean, each platform serves a different purpose. We launched Ipsy. I'm part of the founding team in 2011, and the social media influencers we work with were called YouTubers, and that's because there weren't other platforms. And then with the advent of Instagram coming around and Facebook really shifting its model, they serve different purposes. We found that YouTube was more of a lean back experience, more of these tutorials, whereas Instagram and Instagram
Active.
video is, and even now IGTV is really those quick hits. And a lot of times there's no direct to camera speaking. It's just really demonstration. So it depends what your product is also, and what you want them to take away.
Right. And do you want a call to action? So is your main business goal for them to swipe up to purchase something? You can only do that on certain platforms. So I think you also have to obviously look at the end goal and the result that you want the consumer to take.
And I think it's, when you're planning an influencer campaign, I think in the best of all worlds, it's when you're doing the research on your audience for the overall campaign, not just the influencer campaign. So and in the process of doing that, if you're a good strategist, and I'm going to keep harping on about strategy, by the way, because I think it's one of the missing elements in a lot of campaigns. Is you're looking at your audience, and of course, audience is really important. But how are they consuming media? Which channels are they using? Which channels are they consuming? And it might not be the usual social media channels. It might be Vice, right? So it could be, there's a lot of ex-publishing people here and current publishing people here. It could be, a lot of the publishers are creating their own channels and their own audiences, and maybe that's going to be more of a captive audience for you. And it's so you have a brand partnership, just mentioning brand partnerships, with a media channel, and influencers within that. So it's really just make sure that you're doing your sort of strategic insight gathering and channel gathering as part of the overall process.
Yeah. And I think on that strategy piece too, making sure that you're not taking the same piece of content and trying to just repurpose content A across all different platforms.
Right.
I was on a panel once and someone had the greatest saying. He's like, yeah, I mean, if you put what you put on Snapchat on your LinkedIn, it'd be super lit. And I was like, but that's exactly it. It's like what you put on your different channels is so different for your different audiences or the different way that you're presenting yourself. And it should be the same for your brand as well.
So strategy's sexy.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
So now that we talked about strategy, let's get down into the dirt and have you guys share some specific campaigns that you've activated. What was the goal of the brand? Who was the brand, first of all? Please name names. What did they want to do? What did you guys end up doing? And how did it work? And by the way, we all understand that failure is part of the process. So if for some reason it didn't work great immediately, tell us that. And then what did you do?
I mean, so I think my favorite from Edelman was actually Samsung was getting ready to launch the Gear 360 camera, and it was a brand new product. There weren't any cameras like this before. So it was how do you, and they were launching right around the holiday season. So super cluttered timing, brand new product, and they wanted to partner with Casey Neistat, who I think is a great fit. He is a huge following, but he's also well known for being an expert in these different devices and things like that. And then they wanted to get a lot of buzz around this, obviously. And so what they ended up doing was they wanted to create, the strategy was to create the ultimate holiday card. And they ended up having Casey Neistat flying from a drone. So the drone is carrying Casey, and he has the 360 camera and is flying over Santa Claus Village in, I believe, Finland, and video, taking all of that in, and then that's the holiday card. And so I think what was so amazing about that was that you have, a human flying from a drone. Like you could put me and you get a certain amount of press coverage. You do anything with Casey and you get a certain amount of press coverage. You do those two things combined, amazing. But at the same time, the end result of this holiday card could not have been created if Samsung hadn't created the tech. So it was this really great way of like coming back to the actual product, and that I just feel like was the millions and millions of impressions and huge success. But I think mostly because it actually drove to the true actual product.
So how did you measure the success? Was it through impressions?
So they did measure through impressions. Yeah, absolutely. Video views and comments, likes, all of the above, really tracking all of that. And then obviously Edelman being on the PR side, it was, really tracking the reach of everything. So
So was it in the millions? was the end result?
They actually said billions, but so here's what I will caveat. This happens all the time, especially when it comes to PR metrics. They look at, oh, okay, if I receive something, my household might be X number. It's almost like the circulation reach of old is kind of what happens. And so I always joke that like I have a house with 2 cats, so then they're counting me as 3. So when you ever see those reach or potential reach metrics, take those with a grain of salt. And that's, I would always have my teams pull the absolute, who actually viewed this? How many times was this actually viewed? And then what are the actual likes? What are the actual engagements? All of those things. So.
Amazing. Other examples, please.
So I'll share the most recent example for Ipsy. Who is familiar with Gigi Gorgeous? A couple of you. So Gigi Gorgeous is become a spokesperson for the LGBTQ community. She's a transgender woman. She's had a relationship with Ipsy since before she transitioned. She moved out from Toronto. Her name was Gregory Gorgeous, which kind of led to Gigi Gorgeous. Ipsy is, and I share that because to what Sybil was saying earlier, like the beverage company that wanted the esports people to have the drink on the table, is we have a long-standing relationship with Gigi, so developing a partnership with her didn't come out of left field as just an opportunistic thing to do. Ipsy is a data-driven company. We have 100 billion data points on our customers, so billions with a B. So over the last 8 years, we've captured all these data points. We generate 5 million product reviews a month, which is more than Yelp. So we have these reviews, we have these data points, we can identify white spaces in the market. And we know from the reviews that people like highlighters, people like mascara, people like skincare, whatever they might like. So Gigi wanted to launch a brand, and she came to us, and we've been working with her for years, so there's an existing relationship. So November 1st, we launched the Gigi Gorgeous brand in conjunction with Gigi. We selected 12 SKUs based on all data that we know our customers like. And we also are able to make sure that we only send the product to people over, that we have the data on that like influencers, that like these particular products, which enabled us to be very targeted. One thing about Ipsy is our Glam Bag and Glam Bag Plus and now Glam Bag Ultimate offerings are all data-driven. So if everybody in this room signed up for a Glam Bag, we would all get a different Glam Bag each month based on your beauty profile. So personalization is very important to us. So using the data that we have, we were able to put together this collection. It launched November 1st, so it's a little premature to tell you how successful it is. The media ate it up. There were, we've got over 50 press hits on it, generating over, 250 million impressions right out of the gates. We judge it based on the ratings. So our audience, our community is very active in rating products. So depending on how many hearts they give the product is one way we measure success. We measure it also obviously by sales. But so far the reviews for people that have received their Glam Bags with the product have been very favorable, and sales are going strong. So it's still TBD, but it's an example of how we have a relationship, we have data, and we combine them together to launch a successful product.
So what kind of metrics do you use to map your campaign directly to sales?
Well, we also have the platform for sales. So the model of Ipsy is kind of a simplified model, is sample, share, shop. So you get your Glam Bag Plus in the mail, you sample it. Our community is very active, so they share it. They post on social what they got, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Snap, whatever they choose. And then you have the option to shop. So you're not getting the whole collection, but then you can go on to Ipsy Shopper, where we have an exclusive because we developed this product for Gigi Gorgeous, so we can track, we accurately can track sales back to content.
So if you guys have noticed, we have transitioned into the data portion of this panel, which is super important. I mean, these days, as marketers, we measure everything, and we should measure everything and pivot, and use data strategically to inform our business decisions. So, is there a rule of thumb? So we've heard impressions, we've heard sales. Is there a rule of thumb for what kinds of data you collect and how you use it? So Simon, Jen, do you want to weigh in on the data portion of it?
I mean, I can't really speak to what kinds of data we collect. I think that when you're a brand, I think you obviously collect as much data as humanly possible that's available, that is legal. So it's always important to have as much information about your consumer as humanly possible. But I think speaking about it, from the other side, and with the influencer marketing lens, and how I determine if something's successful is, I really think about the end result of the business, right? So what is that call to action that I'm asking people to take? Am I asking them to shop? Is the overall aim of a campaign awareness? For me, I also think that an active engagement is much better than a passive engagement. But if I take SiriusXM, for example, so someone who we're currently working with, we've helped them launch their new video initiative. When I'm looking at video views are impressive. It means that it's getting their new offering out there. Tons of eyeballs are seeing it. But I'm also really interested in the engagement factor. So are people commenting off platform? Are they liking things? I mean, it's a lot harder for someone to comment on something than it is for them to just passively have a video playing in the background. So how engaged is that audience and that actual consumer? And depending on what your business goal is, engagement is usually everything.
I'm going to be a little more maybe controversial, but data is obviously important. It tells us in an enormous amount before you do something, as you're doing something, what happened after you did something. But it tells us the what, and it doesn't tell us so much the why something happened. Why does this data point exist? And it just cracks me up every time I go through the miserable TSA experience, and you've got the happy face, unhappy face, whatever, unhappy face. And it's some poor schmuck's job to interpret the data. It's like 79% of people that came through the TSA miserable experience were miserable. Well, great. That's horrible. You've got to get it. We need to get this under 50%. How? How are you going to do that? That data is not actionable because you don't know why that data point exists. And so I came across a couple of quotes actually that I think really sort of bring this to light, which is, there was a professor at Stanford in the 60s who said that data is the plural of narrative. I said, well, what does that mean? And actually, to understand the data, what it means is that to understand the data, you have to unpack that data point into the stories that ladder up to that data point. And so how do you do that? You talk to people. You become an investigative journalist. You sort of keep peeling away the layers of those data points until you get to what the core narrative is. And then I came across this video from Jeff Bezos, who's like, we're Amazon. We love data. We love analytics. If we can get it to you 5 seconds faster, we'll get it to you 5 seconds faster. But I also love anecdotes. And so I get stories, anecdotes sent to me by my folks. And you know what? Every time the data and the anecdotes disagree, the anecdotes prevail. So I'm being slightly contrarian, but I
think you're right. You are.
They're part and parcel of the same. Two parts of the same coin, right?
You have to look at the bigger story.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
So the data is a great start. Okay, this is interesting, but why does this data exist? No matter where what sources of data you're using.
It's a piece of the puzzle, and I think it's important to, just like when we talk about marketing strategies, a buzz phrase, like think about a 360 marketing strategy and campaign, and right? But when you're looking at the data too and doing that analysis, you have to paint the bigger picture. And there are so many sources also of data that, you should be collecting. One note, I think, on data that's incredibly important if you work for a brand or a company is centralization. So I think it's really incredibly important to centralize your data. Collecting it from many disparate places is time consuming and often manual. And if you're controlling things in a central way, you can really see that picture in a much more clear way.
And do it, also measure the emotional response as well as the rational response. So data measures the rational response, and mostly, that might be a bit of an overstatement, but that's typically the case. But there are ways to measure the emotional response too, and it's going to give you some color to the data. And I heard you mention System 1, Erin. They're one of your clients?
Yeah.
So System 1 is a great example
Yes.
of measuring, using data to measure emotional responses. So they'll do the happy face thing, but then it's like, why? Then they'll go a step further and ask why. Why are you happy? And they have an online, check them out, they're a fantastic company. We work with them too. And they have 500,000 online panelists around the world. And so they go through this sort of online process. So great, you're unhappy about this ad. It's like a pre-testing methodology. So you can use it for influencer campaigns as well as any story, brand partnership you're about to do. So you feel good about this. Why do you feel good about this? And how does it make you feel? And so you start going into the emotional resonance of it. So just to throw them out when you mentioned that.
Yes, 100% on this. And I actually have a brand example. We had a client who was a partner of Edelman for PR, but not for influencer marketing. And my team started talking to them, and we're like, we would love to work with you. And they're like, okay, yeah, we're interested to hear. But we're very happy with our current influencer agency. And we started digging into what they were doing, and these campaigns were terrible. And we're like, why is it you're happy? And they're like, look how many likes we got, look how many views we got, and look at all the comments. They got so many comments. We started reading the comments. So this is a tech company, and they sent a bunch of, cute young people to Coachella to be at their house at Coachella. And they would post these posts like, hey, I'm at the undisclosed client house at Coachella. And then all the comments are like, I love your shorts. And I'm like, guys, this is not moving the needle at all. This has nothing to do with your brand. They have followers and they're commenting on things, but it has nothing, it's like you're not moving the conversation forward at all. And I think that's one of those cases where the brand became fixated on, is it views or is it comments or, these different pieces, but it's like, but what's the value of that comment to this brand, know? We got them in the end.
And what's the action you want them to take, right? What's the end result?
So super valuable best practices. Any other best practices? So far we've heard centralizing your data is really important, looking at the why behind the campaign, measuring sentiment, not just looking at the raw numbers. Any other best practices around activations?
One thing, trend that I'm seeing is, which is a kind of reference with Gigi Gorgeous, is not making it so transactional and making the relationship more like a partnership and not one-off. I think on both sides, brands are looking for longer relationships with influencers, and influencers are looking for longer relationships with brands. They don't want just a one and done. So find influencers that you want to, be with for a while, and develop programs that show that there's a genuine connection between you and the influencer.
Yeah, I mean, that is a trend I'm seeing a lot. So I think brands are looking to develop in-house influencers. And they're trying to build that long-lasting brand association and relationship with the consumer, and that's a great way to do it. We always talk about investing in what's exclusive to you. So that is one way to sort of, invest in an influencer who's exclusive potentially to your company and your activations.
Yeah, and I think another way to frame exactly that is that, be clear of your authority to publish. When you're forming brand partnerships, whether you're briefing influencers and so on, be clear about your brand's own authority to publish. If you don't have authority to talk about this in the wellness space, sustainability, say in the wellness space, but you want that to be part of your message, it's going to backfire. both on you and on the influencers. So I think being clear about your authority and how that authority, meets the authority that the influencer has, or if it's a, if it's a media channel or whatever, it's clear to make. It's important to make sure that you have that authority to publish.
Makes sense. So we've focused a lot on influencer marketing in particular, but is there anything else that's important that's not influencer marketing that's part of a brand partnership that we should think about?
I think for me, it was always making sure that any of the assets that these influencers are creating, you're also optimizing those and you're putting them across your other channels, across owned, earned, paid. So it's not just living in a silo on the influencers channel. You want to be, if you can use it on your channel and it fits your look and feel, great. The ability to do that, putting paid media behind it. Being able to figure out if you've got multiple influencers and you've got a certain amount of budget, instead of putting even amounts behind each one, figuring out, okay, we put a little bit of paid media and this person's performing better, and so let's put a little bit more here. Or maybe this person is performing better on Instagram, or that one's performing better to this demographic, or, kind of looking at those levers and being able to pull some of those levers, and just not keeping your influencer marketing in a silo.
Yeah, and when you consider the activations too, something to keep in mind when selecting an influencer and sort of what that creative is you always try and extend the network in some way. So, one way to do that, a recent example, and this is after we had worked with them, Kylie Jenner launched her Kylie Skin line. One way she did that was with a highly publicized trip for all her friends to an amazing tropical, location, and everything was branded Kylie Skin. But what you saw for the 3 days was she and her, micro influencer group of friends just posting post after post after post about their real life, organic experiences, albeit fabulous and amazing and semi-unattainable. But it really extended the reach of what she was trying to do. So she was using the platforms of her friends, and it really just amplified things.
And I think that building, on both what Sybil and Jen said, I think it's when you're thinking about it's not just what happens, but what happens next.
Yes.
So you're thinking about the journey that you're taking people on, and you're taking consumers on, and where does the influencer campaign fit into that journey? So great, and so it's not a siloed approach. It is, it's as I said before, sort of anchored by a core narrative, but it's a system of stories and a journey that goes beyond just the influencer campaign and goes to other social channels and potentially, other traditional channels as well.
Because there's always a long tail effect, or we hope that there's a long tail.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you want to build continuous engagement, not a fleeting impression. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and to add on to that is if you do an influencer campaign with any influencer in any category, let the influencer do what the influencer does. 2 points or takeaways would be you're hiring them for a reason. They know their audience. You don't know their audience. Let them talk the way they talk. And the secondly is if you ask for more, influencers are going to do less. And if you ask for less, they're going to do more. And people always say, I want 5 posts and, or 5 static posts, 5 stories, and they're not going to do it. But if they like your brand and you're not greedy, they'll do more for you. And then lastly, I'll add a third takeaway is that keep it real with the influencers. There's so much around exclusivity and people wanting to be brand dedicated, but none of us do anything in life that's just one brand. You open up your refrigerator, you open up your medicine cabinet, you don't have everything from one brand. It's not real. So hire people that you feel comfortable giving creative control and that you trust. But if you try to micromanage them, it's going to go awry.
So we're coming close to the end of the panel, and I want to make sure we have time to take your questions as well. So we're going to cover 2 final questions on this panel, and this is going to be for all of you guys. So the first one is, I know, Corey, you just told us 3 or 4 takeaways. We're going to go with 1 takeaway, if you had to have one, for our audience members. 1 final takeaway or tip, what might it be? And let's get started with Jen.
Sure. I think one tip for me for influencers would be just the authenticity. As general as that sounds, I think that that's been a pitfall for so many brands and so many executions that I've seen. So if something isn't authentic, I've seen it fall flat almost 100% of the time.
You took one word out of my mouth. I have another one, so I'll add that one. So as well as, and this is for brands, as well as being authentic, your message has to be ownable. It's got to be you and only you. And there's, because if you're in the CPG space and you claim that you're fresh and natural, that's not an ownable proposition anymore. Those are table stakes. If you're not fresh and natural, you're not going to be around in 5 years' time. So figure out what it is about your brand story, your narrative, that's true, and it's something that only you can claim. Because as whoever it was that said, "Be yourself," because everybody else is taken. That's true of brands too.
Thank you.
So my takeaway is bigger is not better. So one thing out there, if some of you are small emerging businesses and thinking, I can't hire the Jenners or the Kardashians, you're okay, or Gigi Gorgeous, because we're hearing the word authenticity, and there's greater authenticity with smaller influencers. Find someone that loves your brand. Start somewhere. Maybe they have 100 followers. Maybe they have 1,000 followers. As long as you're getting genuine messages that support, and again, you ask for the rights to repurpose the content, you have the right message. So don't think you have to go after a huge influencer. We know that Matthew McConaughey doesn't drive a Buick and Tom Brady doesn't wear a Tag Heuer watch. Sorry if I ruined it for any of you. So find people that really do drive a Buick and find people that really do wear a Tag Heuer watch and work with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all basically saying the same thing, which is, really find the right person who's already having the conversation that you want to have with your followers, with their followers, and integrate your message in a really engaging way that's on brand for you and on brand for the talent.
Great. And then the final question of the panel before we open it up to you guys is, let's get a little bit predictive. What is the future of influencer marketing? And you don't have to be right. You just have to have an informed opinion, which obviously you all do. So, Jen, can you get us started?
Sure. I mean, I think that we're going to have to evolve to influencer-first social strategies. And I think a lot of that will eventually be paired with the evolution in technology. I mean, things are just changing so rapidly, and we're moving into new spaces, new markets, VR. So how do influencers activate in those arenas? And I think that we have to start innovating now to figure that out.
What's the future, Simon?
I predict that influencer agencies won't exist in 3 years' time. Ooh. As standalone influencer agencies. I think they're by the very nature, and it's the same thing happened with social. The same thing happened with digital before social. It's sort of, you have we're a strictly digital agency, and then suddenly that gets integrated into more traditional channels, and then suddenly social comes along, and there are tons of social agencies that then get snapped up by the bigger agencies that integrate them into their offering. And I think that the exact same thing is going to happen with influencer agencies by necessity. They're already doing it. I just merged my small agency with an even smaller influencer agency. There are much bigger companies that are buying smaller, bigger influencer agencies. So I think it'll be we're just witnessing the peak of that right now, and I think it's gonna change.
Corey?
I think if anyone tells you they can predict the future of influencer marketing, they're lying to you.
But you can, though.
I can tell you short term, I know where the trends are going, and it goes back to, bigger isn't better. There is kind of a trend back towards, again, it's the most overused term in influencer marketing, but it's the most accurate one, of authenticity, of finding smaller influencers, what we call anything from nano or micro influencers, so I'd say 100,000 and below, and because they have greater engagement, greater authenticity, and they're driving better conversion than the larger influencers, they're also more attainable. I mean, quite frankly, you look at people like, I think the Kardashians are a great example, but if we use the media math that Simon was referencing, or the way it's becoming more standardized, they have to charge $250,000, $500,000 for a post, and that pretty much rules out 95% of advertisers.
So I literally built a slide that had Kim Kardashian with an X through it, because all the big brands are like, well, if I just get, it's like they instantly think. And I'm like, if she's not the right person, if she's the right person and that's the exact audience, then absolutely go for it. But if not, like, don't just think, oh, bigger is better and I'll go for this person. Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious to see where things go with Instagram hiding likes. What I've heard from influencers that have followings in multiple countries where that's already gone into effect, there's kind of this interesting. Half of them seem to think that it's not going to change anything, and the other half think that the sky is falling. So I'm curious to see where that goes. I'm hopeful that it will lead more towards people looking at engagement and looking at what are those actual comments. If we don't have that little heart button, like we can still see behind the scenes what those metrics are, but people seem to be a little less likely to click if they don't see, oh, this already got 1 million likes, I'm going to add mine to it. And I'm curious to see how that starts to change the conversation, and I'm hopeful that that will keep it a little bit more into what is the actual, what are the stories and how are people reacting to them, and what is that engagement with this post in a much more real sort of way.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for all the great insights. And now we're going to open up to the audience. If you do have a question, please tell us, just state who you are and keep your question focused. Anyone? Yes.
I work for a small TV network in Innovation. Anyway, I was wondering what you guys would say to someone, to that ancestral idea that as an alternative to paid marketing dollars, you can get influencers instead.
I would say it's not an instead, it's both. And if you can do the two in tandem with each other and leverage the influencer and leverage the paid. And ideally, if you can leverage a couple of influencers and almost do like, here's your kind of A/B testing of this influencer has this message and this influencer has that message and what's resonating most, and leverage paid too.
Definitely. We have a client called Walida. They're a 100-year-old Swiss wellness product. They're fantastic. Skin food is one of their products, and we did this campaign with professional stylists and celebrity stylists. But we did the campaign alongside an ongoing paid media campaign, so we were able to see what the paid media campaign did on its own, and then the increase in sales, which was pretty significant once we ran an influencer campaign alongside it. It really amplified the paid campaign.
I think if you're, because I see some worry in your face, maybe about budget.
Wait, is that the wrong answer?
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. But I also think that you can, just in terms of paid media, I think that I've seen, smaller amounts go further. So I think with really smart audience targeting and just staying on top of that, because you can change that in real time, you're able to make like a little, I'm talking like $500, like $1,000 go a long way.
Yeah, I mean, your ovation. So if it's someone, whether you're pushing the network or you're pushing a program, you find someone that's passionate about one of your shows, and then it's content that you could boost or amplify and put paid against. I mean, it's a great hybrid.
There's also something to be said for, if a car brand is sending me, hey, buy this car, it's really amazing, I'm going to be like, yeah, of course. Like, what is the brand going to say? Of course. If my friend says, I just bought this car and I love it and it's so great and I'm in the market for a car, and then I see the paid ad, suddenly you're a little bit more open to it already. And so that's something you could think about too is, do you first serve them the influencer content and then you retarget them with the brand-led campaign?
Yes.
If you're trying to, I have a travel TV series, and there's so many social medias out there, and we love Instagram, but they've been doing a lot of changes, so everybody's scrambling to figure out what to do there. But if you have one thing that you said, we should really focus on this, and not only just like Instagram, but is it stories or is it IGTV, cooking TV? So that seems like natural. But what would you recommend?
Are you trying to drive viewership? What's your objective?
Yeah, to build the brand, knowledge, or recognition of the brand, build the brand.
So yeah, I think you'd want to break it down in terms of like here's my awareness phase, and I just want people to see this as easily as possible, and then probably now maybe I want people to get engaged with it more. I think you'd want to really put a little bit more specifics around the journey and the goals for each piece of that campaign. For travel, just since you mentioned it specifically, I do feel like Instagram is a great place to be because there are, it does capture people quite a bit. There are so many travel influencers. I feel like that could be a great fit. But again, depends on your message and depends on your target audience. Like if you're targeting a slightly older demographic, maybe you actually want to be on Facebook versus a younger demographic, like maybe you actually want to figure out TikTok and like, let's do something,
Yeah,
So-
I'd also go back to what I said before about just figuring out what it is that your travel brand can own. How does it differentiate itself from other shows that are out there? Because there's a million of them. So, what is it that's only you can claim? Because I think that's, we call it in the media business, we call it an editorial platform. So, what is your editorial platform that enables you to build trust with your audience? Because it's the filter and it's the lens through which you create content.
Well, I understand that, but I was just asking, like, what platform do you think we should be focusing on? Even on Instagram, should we be more focused on IGTV or on the stories or on the...
Well, are you trying to, what is, I think one important thing that you mentioned is user journey. So where are you, what are you trying to get them to do and the action you're trying to get them to take? Because I think stories serve a purpose for one, a better purpose for one thing, and the feed for something else. So for me, the feed is more about the awareness and I think the branding. I think Instagram stories are better for a call to action. If you're able to deep link them into somewhere and track that user, then collect the data, that's incredibly valuable if you have the capability to do that.
All right, guys, so we are at time. I don't believe there's anyone here in this room after us. And if you have any more questions for our panelists or you'd just like to say hello to them, feel free. They've graciously agreed to stay over for a few minutes to meet with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. All right, that's fun.